Welcome back, gang. It's Deltia from Deltiasgaming.com. Necrom is here, both on the PC mega servers and the consoles, and I wanted to redo my solo PvE tier list. In this video, I'm going to go through all classes, including Magic and Stamina Arcanist, which is the brand new class. Usually, ZOS has a tendency of making their new content super overpowered. Will the Arcanist be number one? Stay tuned. Also, if you want any of this information and all the build, check the link in the description below, along with a written guide for more detailed information on all these rankings and why I gave them what I did. Also, do me a big favor and hit that thumbs up if you got something out of this. Leave me a comment on what you think is the best or worst class overall. And let's get started with the Elder Scrolls Online Necrom Chapter Best Solo PvE in the Elder Scrolls. Well, we're not going to start with the best class. We're going to start with what I rank the worst class, and it's kind of ironic. It's the Magic Dragonknight in C- tier. It's ironic that I rank the class here, and it's probably one of the best, if not the best endgame overall DPS, a magic/stamina hybrid build. The reason why I rank it here is it's made for very long-lasting fights, specifically trials, where the fights last 3 to 4 minutes. But for solo PvE content, what happens is some of the fights last 15-10 seconds, especially VMA and Batishram Hollows. Some of those boss fights, with the right gear sets, you absolutely nuke, and you don't see the entire duration of your 24-second dots take the full effect. Also, something interesting about the class is the main spammable Molten Whip costs both resource pools. Why this is great on a stamina build that has excessive magic, on a Magic Dragonknight, you simply run out of stamina playing solo because no one's tanking for you. You're going to have to block, break free, dodge roll, all those mechanics, and if you're using that main spammable frequently, you're going to be drained on stamina and die. Now, the Magic Dragonknight is incredible with the right gear setup, using mythics like Pale Order or False Gods from Trials, which will mask your lack of healing and resource sustain, but you take these away, and what you find out is the Magic Dragonknight, why has really long-lasting, great damage, just doesn't hang in there with the other classes without these gear sets that carry your healing and survivability. I don't recommend this for beginning players or the average players playing solo because the healing just isn't there and you're going to run out of stamina using that main spammable. But for late game, end game players, playing a Dragonknight hybrid in Trials and more serious PvE is the way to go. But for solo PvE, I just don't recommend it. Moving on to another end game PvE heavy hitter, but not so much in solo. That's the Magic Necro coming in C tier. The Magic Necro is on our list coming in at C tier. Similar to the Dragonknight, what it does is has very long, very many damage over time effects, specifically something called blast bones, which you're going to have to constantly cast and babysit. It's very unforgiving gameplay at a high level. Put this in a trial or PvE DPS with a pocket healer and a tank, you can pull some big numbers, and the Necro is a very good group-oriented build. You also can play this in melee range using Hungering Scythe as your main spammable instead of Skull and do pretty good healing. And it has decent survivability, but the resource sustain department is kind of lackluster. It really wants you to use stamina-based skills and hybridize. That's why the Stam version of the Necro is just simply more powerful. You're able to piggyback on 2 resource pools rather than 1, do damage, healing, AoE, and you have access to an execute. So the Magic Necro endgame PvE, fantastic, but for the average solo player, I do not recommend this. It's clunky, it's complex, and while you can do some decent damage, there's just a lot better options than this one. Moving on to another lackluster solo PvE class, and that's the Stamina Warden. Lord Warden! The Stamina Warden comes in at C+ tier on our list, and the reason why is the weak resource sustain has always been an issue that hindered this class, and simply that the Magic Warden version is just a lot better. The reason why is the Magic Warden gets Piercing Cold, basically increasing your damage done by 2%, and when you wield an Ice Staff, it's 12%. So the game really incentivizes you to use an Ice Staff and play magic. When you play as a Magic Warden, which we'll get to in a little bit later, you can use some stamina-based skills and resource sustain that way. With weak resource sustain and a heavy incentive on using a Ice Staff and playing as a magic build, the Stamina Warden isn't that good. There's also some gear sets and some skill changes that happened in 2022 that really nerf the overall damage of this class, and you don't see many people playing it in solo PvE. You can also play a bow low stamina warden, which is pretty fun, and a lot of people like that. But just do not look for this class to be dominating in solo arenas. It's just not there in its current form. Moving on to one of my favorite endgame PvE classes, but not very good in solo PvE, that's the Stamina Dragonknight. And the Stamina Dragonknight comes in at B tier. Stamina Dragonknight, just like the Magic Dragonknight, is absolutely god tier at endgame group PvE content. It has great survivability, super long-lasting dots, one of the best ultimates in the game for pure raw damage, and it's just great survivable. But when you play in solo without the right carry gear sets and mythics, you just don't take advantage of what the class does well, and that's very long-lasting dots. Again, the fights don't last very long, and you have to change morphs to a lesser damage morph like Burning Embers rather than Venomous Claw to get a little bit of healing. You combine that with something like Carve to get a damage shield, and it increases your survivability. But what you find out yourself doing with the Stamina Dragonknight is constantly taking weaker morph choices or having to heal yourself more frequently than other classes that have higher survivability. You also don't see the benefit of those long-lasting dots because things just die so quickly. Stamina Dragonknight is my go-to for endgame PvE and group, specifically trials. It's complex, it's a lot of fun, it does a lot of damage and has great survivability. But when I go into solo PvE, I'm just like, oh, give me a better class. I'm tired of the weak healing. I'm tired of super complex, long-lasting dots. It's just not beginner-friendly. Other classes have better survivability, but if you're interested in trials, this is something you want to level up and wait until you get to endgame. Moving on to number 10 on our list, and that's the Magic Warden. Lord Warden! Magic Warden comes in at B tier on our list. The reason why it's ahead of the Stamden, it has a lot better class identity. With the Ice Staff passive, you get a lot more damage, a lot of class identity. You can play at medium, close range, or long range, and use your Deep Fissure for damage. But once again, the class lacks resource sustain. You're also kind of like a buff bot. You do nothing but load up your bars with animal companion abilities to take advantage of your passive, increasing your damage, and you're just constantly buffing. And as soon as you try to offload some of your magic abilities to stamina, you run into a problem not being able to break free, dodge, sprint, and block. I prefer the Magic Warden when playing this class in solo PvE, but I still think it's not that good compared to other on our list. It does have great class identity, good single target and damage. It also has a pet if you're into that, and also really good self-healing. For serious endgame solo PvE, this is one I'm not going to recommend. Moving on to another one on our list, and a lot of people will like this, but it's really not that good. That's the Stamina Nightblade coming in at B tier. Stamina Nightblade is next on our list, B tier. The main strengths of the class is basically single target damage. It's really built towards single target damage with good resource sustain, and it's a lot of fun. You're bursty, you can nuke down single targets, but the downside is you are super light attack dependent. You're not really good at using light attacks, syncing them up, timing it perfectly. You're not going to take advantage of its main class strength because Merciless Resolve, a lot of your passives, and your abilities rely on you constantly doing light attacks. So it has a wide range of outcomes with different players not getting the full use out of the Stamina Nightblade. If you have a high skill level, you're going to see an increase in damage and overall survivability, but for the average player, it's pretty tough. Also, you lack a lot of healing with the stamina versus the magicka version of this class, which is what I always recommend for solo PvE players that want to play a ranged class, and your main spamble just isn't a heal in comparison to it. The Stamina Nightblade does have a lot of options when it comes to main spambles. You can play at range, medium range, up close and personal and aggressive with one of the most rewarding and fun playstyles. With the magicka version of this class for solo PvE, it's just a lot better. Moving on to the Magic Arcanist coming in at 8 and B plus tier. So the Magic Arcanist is here kind of low on the list, and the reason why I put it low on the list is it just doesn't have the same damage, survivability, and just mind-numbing gameplay the Stamina Arcanist has. You're going to be very vulnerable while beaming. So Fake Harbor, typically pragmatic Fake Harbor is what you're going to use for solo play. It gives you a big shield, 4.5 second channel. This is absolutely massive damage, but it takes a lot to get used to. You have to aim it, you can eat heavy attacks and get killed while you're doing it, you have to cancel the animation, and when you're getting used to it, it's not going to be friendly for the average player. Plus, if you're playing a pure magic build, you're going to need to hybridize to sustain, using a stamina ability here or there, because your magic will just get nuked so fast. Another disadvantage of this is the stamina-based version has the ability to use Flail to build cruxes, the green little floating circles around you. As a magic-based version, you can use this, but you really tank your stamina a lot. So you almost have to use a different crux builder or be super cognizant of your stamina, because if you don't dodge, you don't bash, you don't break free, typically you're dead. The pros are great damage, You can play at range, medium, long range, or up close and personable, and has a lot of flexible weapon choices. A lot of people like the magic version of this class because you can just hang back with a lightning staff or a fire staff and just sit there and beam. But when you're talking about serious end game, what's going to do the most damage solo PvE, leveling, or even mid to late game, Stamina Arcanist, just wait. It's absolutely insane damage. Can't recommend it enough. Magic with light armor just doesn't have the oomph, just doesn't have the passive survivability and resource sustain that Stamina does. Moving on to something I really love playing, but it's coming in at number 7 on our list, and that's A- tier, the Stamina Templar. The Stamina Templar is one of the simplest Stamina classes. It has a AoE spammable biting jabs that does a lot for you, basically single target and AoE. So you can free up your bar space and not run a bunch of complex dots and just basically spam this over and over if you want to, along with Radiating Glory, which is a range execute that hits extraordinary hard. So the resource sustain is pretty good on this. It has great survivability and it's very simple. But what are the downsides? Well, you have to play in melee range to get the most out of this. And melee range has some issues, along with your melee ability biting jabs not healing you, unlike the magic version of this. And this is what you're seeing a lot of the times and what I recommend for solo players. When you're doing damage, are you passively getting healed with your skills, a passive, or something else? Because this is what separates the really good classes from the bad ones, is while you're doing damage, what's your healing? What's your survivability? Because then you don't have to take off time to heal yourself, buff, and survive. This is why I rank the Stamina Templar in this position, and why I rank the Magplar much higher. Your main spammable, very similar, but it heals you, and it heals you for a lot. Stam Templar is still fantastic, love it, but it's just not what it used to be. Moving on to number 6 on our list, that's the Stamina Sorcerer coming in at A tier. So the Stam Sorc is basically a lesser version of the Magic Sorc. You're kind of seeing this replay. There's just a different version that's a little bit better. What the Stam Sorc does really well is it gets access to critical surge, essentially healing you when you do critical damage. They actually made a mythic similar to this to Pale Order because it's so strong. So with crit surge active, essentially you can be super aggressive, have lightning blazing speed, and do a ton of damage. The sorcerer also has access to pets, so you can slot a couple of pets and not have a lot of global cooldowns to manage and babysit while doing a lot of damage and having high survivability. The downside is really weak resource sustain. This has always held the class back, especially if you're not using carry gear sets that just basically proc infinite resource sustain for you. You start leaning into more and more magic abilities because your stamina just goes away so quick, and the game wants you to use a channel to basically get back resources. Well, that's good in PvP, not so good in PvE because it just takes your foot off the gas doing a lot less damage. So you start speccing more into magic, you start using the pets, and you're playing in melee with the Stam Sorc, and you're like, why am I playing a Stam Sorc when I just could play magic, get all the advantages and none of the disadvantages? Big brain, that's why the Magic Sorc is better than the Stamina Sorc currently. Moving on to the Magic Nightblade coming in number 5, and that's also A tier. I moved the Magic Nightblade down the list a little bit just because it's a little bit more complex, and it's also, like the Stamina Nightblade, very light attack dependent. It has great survivability. It's also a great range damage and some of the best ultimate generation in the game. You can use a main spammo like Swallow Souls, which will constantly heal you. You combine that with something like Twisting Path that does damage over time and also makes you very, very quick. But just similar to the Stamina Nightblade, what holds this back is people's inability or ability to weave light attacks, which some people find incredibly annoying. If you can weave in light attacks, taking advantage of Merciless Resolve, shooting the spectral bow off and hitting very hard is going to be awesome. If you're not God's Gift to light attack weaving, your damage is going to suffer, your survivability is going to suffer, and so is your resource sustain. Overall, love the Magic Nightblade, one of my favorite all-time solo builds. They're just a little bit better options currently, but if you like a range caster that has a lot of speed and that has the ability to heal while using the main spammable, Magic Nightblade is it. Moving on to the Stamina Necro coming in at number 4, and that's A+ tier. Everything I said about the Magic Necro is not the same for Stam Necro. It has really hard-hitting dots. It has better resource sustain because you can lean on your magic pool and free up a lot of your stamina pool. But it does play melee and super aggressive, using either Ruinous Scythe or you can use the Skull, so you do have some options there. What holds the class back from being higher on our list is it's very hard to play. The rotation is quite complex, and one of the most, if not the most complex rotation at endgame group PvE. But similar to the Dragonknight, endgame group PvE, it shines. Why I like this version better than the magic version is you play at melee range, use Ruinous Scythe, Carve, Echoing, or Resolving Vigor, and you have incredible survivability and better resource sustain. Plus, you have AoE dots and AoE blast bones and AoE Ruinous Scythe, so you're built to do good single target damage and AoE damage. But again, this thing ain't for everybody. It's complex, it can be clunky, it has a steep learning curve, and not the best resource sustain. But if you want something heavy hitter that you can pivot from solo to endgame group, Stamina Necro is a good choice. Now we're getting in the S tier rankings in the heavy hitters. 3 that I highly suggest and absolutely love for different reasons. We're going to stick with number 3, the Templar, coming in at S- tier. The Magplar is up in S- tier, and the reason why it's so good, it's fantastically simple with puncturing sweeps as your main spammable plane in melee range. It allows you to do damage both single target and AoE and heal you for a % of the damage done. This is critical for PvE solo play because no one's going to be healing for you. So the more time you have on target doing damage, the easier the game will be for you instead of stopping and healing yourself. Also, the higher damage you will have. And the Templar just does this, excels at this. But the downsides are you have to play in melee range. It also is difficult to resource sustain. The Magplar specifically really wants you to use pretty much all magic abilities. And with the game playing very hybrid-wise, you really are incentivized to use some stamina abilities. The Magplar remains one of the best for beginners and even solo at endgame PvE because your main spammable heals you. You get a lot of your good skills early on, and you can rely on your class skills and easy to find base game gear sets and blow through anything solo. But again, weak resource sustain and playing in melee, separate the class and put it back a little bit. Now we get to 1 and 2. We have the Magic Sorc and the Stamina Arcanist. And I played them back to back in both solo arenas, open world, and everything else, both with 1 bar and 2. Typically, ZOS comes out and they have their new class super overpowered. Over the entire PTS cycle of testing this, it really wasn't that powerful until the very end. The Stamina Arcanist, that is. They really gassed it up and made it, in my opinion, the best solo class. But let's talk about the Magic Sorcerer number 2 before we move on to number 1. The Magic Sorcerer I moved down to number 2 in S tier. The reason why Sorc is so strong, whether you play it with a 1 bar Oakensoul or a 2 bar build, is really the combination of critical surge giving you healing while you're doing damage with crits, and then also your pets. These pets basically allow you to do a lot of damage without managing a lot of global cooldowns. They act as decoys, you can cast them again to get a heal. They're fantastic, and now they stun. Also, you have Raider Storm Atronach, which is one of the best, highest damage single targets in the game. And with Oakensoul, you can still do fantastic damage, though it was nerfed in this chapter. The Oakensoul and Power buff along with Storm Master. So that build is still fantastic, but not the raw strength that it used to be. What the class lacks is essentially massive AoE damage, which typically your made spammable is not going to be AoE unless you're doing the heavy attack build. But you can get some outside skills like Razor Caltrops and Mystic Orbs and kind of fill in the gaps for what the class lacks. But you're really pigeonholed in the pets. It has really good speed, critical surge for great survivability, and it is lightning fast, playing at range, and fun. So the Magic Sorc, highly recommend it for solo players because it's one of the simplest. You can play at range, it has great healing, the gear sets are very easy to get. But unfortunately, there's one class to rule them all. Didn't want to rank it number 1, but the Stamina Arcanist is number 1, and here's why. The Stamina Arcanist is the best solo class in ESO PvE, coming in S+ tier. What can I say about this? There's almost zero downsides. It has the best damage, it can play at range, it has god tier survivability, and the resource sustain is insane, along with the ultimates all being fantastic. What the developers did over the course of testing is really just gas this class up to be number 1. They give Pragmatic Fate Carver a massive shield, so when you're vulnerable while beaming, you have a shield that will protect you. You also, with the Stam version, can spam the Flail ability, and it gives you heals. The healing done does not require a target, and you can crit for 8,000 with a fully optimized build. So you have a shield, and you have another spammable that heals you, allowing you to throttle down on damage, not requiring mythics, and doing the most damage on almost any class in the game. It can melt down solo arenas like nothing, and I got my highest and fastest score in Datashram Hollows, and I've done this over 500 times probably. What I love about the stamina version of this is you can really hybridize this for solo play, so I actually backbar a Destruction Staff staff, and I use Wall of Elements and Elemental Susceptibility. That takes advantage of my magic pool, freeing up my stamina pool to just basically do my spammable, to do flail, and beam Fate Carver. And I almost have 0 resource sustain issues with this. Plus, it's just so simple. You only throw on maybe 1-2 dots, a couple of spammables in your beam for 4.5 seconds, and you're absolutely laser beaming everything. I really didn't want to rank this number 1, but objectively looking at the leaderboard scores and what I was capable to do, it's just up there. Now, what's the major downside of this class? Well, you are vulnerable while using the beam, the Fate Carver, 4.5 seconds. So you're going to have heavy attacks coming in, you're going to have to dodge, you're going to have to basically clip and block or dodge cancel the animation so you don't die. That's really the only disadvantage. It has everything that every other class has. It has healing while you're doing damage. It has resource sustain, just basically passively keeping up 1 skill, recuperative treatises. It has in-class amazing ultimates, good passives. The crux building system is very simple and easy to understand. And what else can I say? It's just a juggernaut right now. It hits the holy trinity of good damage, survivability, and resource sustain. Plus, it's ultra simplistic and easy to use. No, this is not a hashtag ad for you to buy the Necrom Chapter, but if I'm being honest right now, in its current version, which will probably get nerfed, it's by far the best and actually very, very enjoyable to play. If you got something out of this video, do me a big favor, hit that thumbs up, link in the description for all of these builds in case you want to pick one up and start playing it. I also have a written guide on this topic that goes in a little bit more detail on the rankings if you want to look at that as a reference point. I'll keep updating and refreshing this list every quarter or anytime there's a big new change or a new DLC. Also check me out on twitch.tv/Deltiasgaming where my mom claims I'm the best streamer alive. Appreciate you.